December 1941. Washington, D.C. Combined Chiefs of Staff formed. Roosevelt and Marshall lead. Core metric industrial output tripled by 1943. A continental republic thrust into war after Germany's declaration on 11 December 1941 faced a fractured Europe under Nazi domination. By spring 1945, American leadership had orchestrated the Western armies shattering Adolf Hitler's Reich. What stunned German commanders was not merely the flood of American tanks, planes, and ships, but the disciplined system of decisions, coordination, and endurance that held the Allied coalition together until Germany's strategic options vanished. This was no improvisation. It was a leadership machine forged in Washington and London during late 1941 and early 1942, designed to keep the Allies focused on dismantling the Nazi state. Before the United States entered the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his advisors had already marked Nazi Germany as the primary threat. The Lend-Lease Act, passed on 11 March 1941, funneled aid to Britain and the Soviet Union, signaling a tilt toward European engagement. Secret U.S. British staff talks in early 1941 laid groundwork for joint action. After Pearl Harbor and Germany's war declaration, Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill met at the Arcadia Conference, spanning December 1941 to January 1942, to cement the Germany First strategy. This decision sidelined Pacific ambitions, prioritizing the European theater where Germany's industrial and military core lay. The combined Chiefs of Staff, linking General George C., Marshal Admiral Ernest J., King General Henry H. Arnold and Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, with British planners, became the engine translating political will into operational plans. This structure ensured that strategic debates over timing fronts or resources served the singular goal of crushing Germany. Engine overhaul after 50 hours at full throttle. The stakes were stark. Without American-led fronts in the West, the Soviet Union might falter under Germany's eastern weight, or Germany could fortify Europe, dragging the war into a bloody stalemate. American leadership rested on three pillars: Germany first defeat through combined arms on the European mainland, and industrial mobilization to supply both U.S. and Allied forces. Marshall pushed for a cross-channel invasion as early as 1942, but British caution and North African demands led to a Mediterranean detour. U.S. leaders accepted this, preserving coalition unity while keeping German forces stretched. The War Production Board, established in January 1942, and the Office of War Mobilization, created in May 1943, synchronized industry shipping and manpower. By 1943, industrial output had tripled, ensuring landing craft, aircraft, and ammunition stockpiled in Britain and the Mediterranean. Roosevelt shielded his commanders from political interference, granting Marshall and others latitude to negotiate with the British while insisting on a Western front. This balance of political backing and logistical foresight allowed the Allies to scale operations yearly, each campaign larger than the last. German planners, watching American convoys cross the Atlantic, realized their U-boat campaign could not choke this industrial tide. The United States was not just a supplier, but a strategic fulcrum, aligning allies toward a single, unrelenting purpose. November 1942, North Africa Operation Torch launched Eisenhower Command's core metric 500,000 tons of supplies delivered monthly. The American leadership system, rooted in Washington's strategic clarity, now faced the test of execution across vast distances and complex alliances. Dwight D. Eisenhower, a general whose skill in managing multinational staffs had elevated him, became the embodiment of this system's practical application. In November 1942, as commander of Operation Torch, he led Allied landings in North Africa, navigating tensions among American, British, and French forces. His mission was clear: clear the Axis from Tunisia, securing the Mediterranean's southern flank. 500,000 tons of supplies crossed the Atlantic monthly to sustain this campaign. Eisenhower's role was not tactical brilliance, but coalition maintenance, ensuring that competing national priorities did not fracture the Allied effort. The Torch landings forced Germany and Italy to divert divisions to Tunisia, where they were defeated by May 1943. This victory opened sea lanes and set the stage for further Mediterranean operations. Meanwhile, the combined Chiefs of Staff under Marshall's influence kept the larger goal in sight: a cross-channel invasion to strike Germany's heart. The Mediterranean was a necessary step, not a distraction, tying down German forces while Allied power grew. By late 1943, Eisenhower was named Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force, tasked with orchestrating the return to Northwest Europe. His headquarters, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, translated Roosevelt's and Marshall's strategies into daily orders. He managed disputes between strong-willed subordinates: General Bernard Montgomery's caution clashing with Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley's drive, while keeping the offensive's momentum. Sortie rate sustained at 1,000 daily missions. This was U.S. leadership in action. Not a single hero, but a culture of clear priorities, coalition discipline, and refusal to let setbacks derail the timetable. The Mediterranean campaigns continued to shape the Allied approach. The Sicily landings in July 1943, followed by the invasion of mainland Italy in September, pinned German divisions far from France. These operations, supported by 500,000 tons of monthly supplies, eroded Germany's ability to reinforce its Atlantic wall. Simultaneously, the strategic air campaign led by the U.S. 8th Air Force from Britain and later the 15th from Italy targeted German industry, oil and transport. German commanders noted the relentless pressure Allied bombers, guided by improved radar, struck with precision. Luftwaffe pilots cursed American escorts, outranging their fighters. Eisenhower's leadership ensured that each operation from Torch to Italy built toward the decisive blow. American industrial output, now flooding Britain with materiel, gave him the tools to plan the Normandy invasion. The United States had transformed from a distant arsenal into a coalition leader, its commanders and planners synchronizing air, sea, and ground forces across theaters. Germany's high command, still believing the Atlantic would slow American armies, underestimated this operational tempo. The Allies were not just fighting battles, they were executing a multi-year design to overwhelm the Reich's defenses. June 1944. Normandy, France. Operation Overlord, executed Eisenhower. Command's core metric: 2 million troops landed by August 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy on 6 June 1944 marked the culmination of American leadership's strategic vision, forged in Washington and London years earlier. Under Dwight D. Eisenhower's command, U.S. British and Canadian forces stormed the French coast, realizing the cross-channel assault General George C. Marshall had championed since 1942. The operation's scale was staggering. 2 million troops supported by thousands of ships and aircraft landed by August 1944. This was no gamble, but a calculated strike backed by years of industrial mobilization and coalition planning. The Normandy landings shattered German assumptions that the Atlantic Wall could repel a determined invasion. American leadership, through Eisenhower's broad front strategy, ensured German forces could not concentrate against a single sector. After breaking out from Normandy in July and August 1944, Allied armies swept across France, liberating Paris and pushing toward the German border. Air superiority maintained with 5,000 sorties daily. The U.S. 8th Air Force, alongside British bombers, crippled German oil and transport, leaving the Wehrmacht struggling to move reserves. German commanders, reeling from the speed of the Allied advance, saw their defensive lines unravel. At Falaise in August 1944, American and British forces encircled and destroyed much of Germany's 7th Army. German generals cursed the Allied air umbrella that pinned their tanks. The myth of German operational superiority crumbled as U.S. leadership sustained pressure across multiple fronts, denying the Reich time to regroup. The combined Chiefs of Staff, coordinating from Washington, ensured Eisenhower had the materiel to exploit these gains, with supply lines, delivering 2 million tons monthly by late 1944. Even when Germany launched a desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, American leadership held firm. Eisenhower and his subordinates, including Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley, treated the Battle of the Bulge as a temporary setback. Forces, backed by Washington's unwavering support, restored the line within weeks, and resumed the advance. This resilience reflected the deeper strength of the Allied system. Political alignment, industrial depth, and operational flexibility outmatched Germany's centralized, overstretched command. By March 1945, U.S. forces seized a bridge over the Rhine at Remagen, crossing the river in multiple sectors soon after. 2 million troops now pressed into Germany's heartland, supported by relentless air and artillery barrages. The German High Command, fragmented and outmaneuvered, could no longer shift divisions to plug gaps. American leadership's insistence on a clear main effort, sustained since the Arcadia Conference, had eroded Germany's ability to fight a cohesive defense. The Reich's collapse was now a matter of weeks, not years, as Allied armies closed in from west and east. March 1945, Rhine River, Germany, 1st U.S. Army crosses at Remagen. Eisenhower commands core metric, 2 million tons supplied monthly. The Rhine crossings in March 1945 signaled the final unraveling of Nazi Germany's defenses. American forces, under Dwight D. Eisenhower's command, exploited the captured bridge at Remagen, pouring divisions across the river while other sectors followed. 2 million tons of supplies delivered monthly fueled this relentless advance. The German High Command, now fractured by Adolf Hitler's erratic orders, watched helplessly as U.S., British and Canadian armies sliced through the Ruhr, Germany's industrial core. The Red Army advancing from the east tightened the vice, creating pressures the Reich could no longer withstand. German assumptions about American limitations, doubts about raising, moving, and sustaining armies across the Atlantic lay shattered. Between 1942 and 1944, the United States had built a war machine that overwhelmed the Reich's logistics and manpower. Luftwaffe grounded after losing 2,000 aircraft in 1944. The Nazi leadership, centralized around Hitler, faltered under the weight of Allied coordination. German decisions, driven by political loyalty rather than operational reality, came too late to counter the simultaneous fronts opened by American-led forces in the West and Soviet armies in the East. The turning point seen through German eyes was brutal. Allied logistics outpaced our ability to destroy their supplies. This was the collapse of Germany's strategic myth. U.S. and British leaders, since the Arcadia Conference in 1941, had linked every operation, North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Normandy, to the decisive campaign in northwest Europe. Unlike Germany's reactive, disjointed defense, the Allies maintained a consistent design, eroding the Reich's ability to maneuver. By April 1945, American armies encircled entire German army groups while Berlin faced Soviet assault. The German High Command, once confident in its operational edge, now scrambled to shift depleted units against an enemy that seemed inexhaustible. The American leadership system, built on industrial mobilization and coalition discipline, proved its decisive advantage. The War Production Board and Office of War Mobilization ensured 2 million tons of supplies reached Eisenhower's armies each month, sustaining the offensive's tempo. General George C. Marshall, coordinating with the combined chiefs of staff, maintained strategic alignment, refusing to let tactical setbacks like the Ardennes counteroffensive derail the broader plan. Supply chain sustained at 2 million tons monthly. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's death on 12 April 1945, weeks before victory, did not disrupt this system. President Harry S. Truman inherited a machine that ran without pause, its political, military, and industrial components synchronized to crush Germany. As American forces advanced into Bavaria and linked with Soviet troops at the Elbe River in late April 1945, the Reich's collapse became visible. Cities fell, divisions surrendered, and Hitler's regime disintegrated. Germany's unconditional surrender on 7 May 1945 marked the triumph of the American-led coalition. The leadership model forged at Arcadia, refined through Torch and Normandy, and executed by Eisenhower, had achieved its aim: dismantle a dictatorship that had dominated Europe. The post-war occupation, planned by US and British officials since 1943, aimed to rebuild Germany as a stable state, reflecting American leadership's foresight beyond mere victory. This outcome was no accident, but the result of a multi-year design. The United States had aligned its political will, industrial might, and operational execution to outlast and overpower Germany. The lessons were stark. Clear strategy, coalition unity, and logistical dominance could defeat a continental enemy. American leadership, by maintaining focus and adaptability, had not only won the war, but set the stage for a new European order. The unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany on 7 May 1945, signed in a schoolhouse in Reims, marked the triumph of American leadership's calculated design. Dwight D. Eisenhower, present as Supreme Commander, had guided Allied forces to this moment, backed by a system that synchronized political will, industrial output, and coalition warfare. 2 million tons of supplies delivered monthly had sustained the relentless advance from Normandy to the Elbe. The Reich, which had once overrun Europe, lay in ruins, its military and economic systems shattered by a multi-year Allied campaign driven by decisions made in Washington and London. American leadership's success was not merely in defeating Germany, but in outmaneuvering its strategic assumptions. German planners had believed the United States could not project sustained power across the Atlantic while fighting in multiple theaters. Luftwaffe crippled after 2,000 aircraft lost in 1944. Yet the War Production Board and Office of War Mobilization, established in 1942 and 1943, had ensured a steady flow of materiel-enabling operations from North Africa to the Rhine. The combined Chiefs of Staff, under General George C. Marshall's steady hand, maintained coalition unity, ensuring that tactical diversions never derailed the focus on Northwest Europe. German generals, reflecting on their defeat, admitted the Allies' logistical supremacy overwhelmed their defenses. American convoys outran our U-boats' reach. This admission underscored the collapse of Germany's strategic confidence. The U.S. leadership model, rooted in Roosevelt's Germany First strategy and executed through Eisenhower's multinational commands, had created simultaneous pressures that Germany's centralized loyalty-driven system could not counter. By 1945, the Reich's divisions were encircled, its industries bombed, and its command structure paralyzed, while American-led forces maintained operational tempo with 2 million tons of monthly supplies. The post-war period revealed the depth of American foresight, planning for Germany's occupation begun by U.S. and British officials in 1943 aimed to prevent future aggression while rebuilding a stable Europe. The Morgenthau Plan, briefly considered, was set aside for a reconstruction approach that became the foundation of the Marshall Plan by 1947. President Harry S. Truman inheriting Franklin D. Roosevelt's framework after his death on 12 April 1945 ensured continuity. Supply lines sustained at 2 million tons monthly until surrender. The occupation under U.S. leadership prioritized demilitarization and democratization, reflecting a strategic vision that extended beyond victory to long-term peace. The lessons American commanders and civilians drew from the European theater were precise. A clear, grand strategy, institutionalized coalition mechanisms, and early logistical control could defeat a well-armed enemy. The Arcadia Conference of 1941 had set the tone, aligning allies toward a single purpose. The industrial mobilization, producing 2 million tons of supplies monthly, had given Eisenhower the tools to execute that vision. This alignment of political, military, and economic power proved that American leadership, when unified, could dismantle a continental dictatorship and reshape the global order. The war's end was not just a military triumph, but a demonstration of systems engineering applied to strategy, leaving a legacy that would guide U.S. policy for decades. My apologies for the premature END marker in Section 6. The narrative for Section 6 was intended to continue the story, but was incorrectly concluded. Below, I will extend Section 6 seamlessly from where it left off. Maintaining the classic storytelling structure, third-person cold analysis, engineering, first tone 10, 18-word sentences, ASCII standard uncontracted English, and all specified constraints, for example. Backbone stat of 2 million tons, supplied monthly repeated mandatory cold line adversary point of view is less than or equal to 25 words. The continuation will aim to complete Section 6 within the 700-800 word target, ensuring narrative resolution while leaving room for a potential additional section by ending with continue. I will not restart, summarize, or violate hard prohibitions, for example, no labels, no contractions, no emojis. If this section fully resolves the story, I will note it, but still end with continue per the continuation rule. Section 6, Global Realignment, AM American Leadership's Lasting Strategic Framework. Previous section, text. The United States, once a reluctant belligerent, emerged as a global architect, its wartime leadership, framework shaping NATO's formation by 1949 and the containment of Soviet expansion. This legacy, born in the crucible of 1941 to 1945, demonstrated that American leadership, when focused and systematic, could not only win wars but redefine the world. June 1945, Berlin, Germany. Allied occupation begins. Eisenhower and Clay oversee core metric, 2 million tons supplied monthly sustained reconstruction. The occupation of Germany, launched in June 1945, tested the durability of American leadership's wartime systems in a new, uncertain peace. Dwight D. Eisenhower, transitioning from battlefield command to occupation oversight, worked alongside General Lucius D. Clay, who managed the U.S. zone. 2 million tons of supplies delivered monthly sustained not only military operations but now the feeding and rebuilding of a devastated nation. This logistical backbone, established by the War Production Board in 1942, proved as critical in peace as it had in war, ensuring stability in a region teetering on chaos. American leadership's wartime principles, clear strategy, coalition, unity, and logistical control, now guided the occupation's complex tasks. The combined chiefs of staff, though winding down, left a legacy of coordination that General George C. Marshall carried into his post-war role as Secretary of State. Denazification processed 1 million cases by 1946. Clay, under Washington's directives, balanced demilitarization with economic recovery, recognizing that a starving Germany could fuel unrest or Soviet influence. The U.S. zone encompassing Bavaria and Hesse became a testing ground for rebuilding a democratic society, with American engineers restoring power grids and railways destroyed by Allied bombing. German civilians living amid rubble noted the precision of American aid. Allied trucks delivered what our factories no longer could. This post-war reality obliterated Nazi propaganda about Western weakness. The United States, leveraging 2 million tons of monthly supplies, not only maintained its occupation forces, but also provided food and materials to millions of displaced Germans. Unlike Hitler's rigid loyalty-based command, American leadership empowered field commanders like Clay to adapt policies to local conditions, ensuring flexibility within a broader strategic framework set in Washington. The Yalta and Potsdam conferences of 1945, involving President Harry S. Truman after Franklin D. Roosevelt's death, had divided Germany into 4 zones, with the Soviet Union controlling the east. American planners, wary of Moscow's ambitions, prioritized rapid stabilization in their sector. By 1946, these efforts seeded the Marshall Plan, which would inject billions into Western Europe's recovery by 1947. 2 million tons of supplies monthly sustained this transition, enabling the U.S. to shift from conqueror to rebuilder without losing momentum. The occupation's success hinged on decisions made years earlier, when Roosevelt and Marshall insisted on aligning military victories with long-term political goals. The broader impact of American leadership emerged in the war's aftermath. The principles that crushed Germany, industrial mobilization, coalition discipline, and strategic clarity, shaped the formation of NATO in 1949 and the U.S. led containment of Soviet expansion. The war had transformed the United States from an isolationist power into a global engineer, its leadership model, a blueprint for organizing alliances and resources. This framework, tested against the Reich, now faced a new adversary in the Cold War, but its core remained unchanged: align systems, prioritize logistics, and maintain focus. The victory over Germany, secured by 2 million tons of monthly supplies, was not just a military feat, but a demonstration of how American leadership could reshape the global order for decades. July 1947, Washington, D.C. Marshall Plan announced Truman and Marshall led core metric, 2 million tons supplied monthly enabled recovery. The triumph over Nazi Germany in 1945 was not the end but the foundation of a new global framework engineered by American leadership. In July 1947, General George C. Marshall, now Secretary of State under President Harry S. Truman, announced the European Recovery Program, known as the Marshall Plan, to rebuild Western Europe. 2 million tons of supplies delivered monthly during the war had sustained the defeat of the Reich. Now this logistical capacity fueled the reconstruction of nations ravaged by conflict. The United States, once a distant arsenal, had become the architect of a stable democratic West. The principles that crushed Germany, strategic clarity, coalition discipline, and industrial, might define this post-war vision. The wartime Combined Chiefs of Staff, led by Marshall, had aligned allies against a common enemy. Now American leadership forged economic and military alliances to counter Soviet expansion. Reconstruction funds, allocated at $4 billion annually. The Marshall Plan, injecting billions into Europe from 1948 to 1952, rebuilt factories, railways and ports in West Germany and beyond, ensuring economic stability as a bulwark against communism. This was no improvisation, but a deliberate extension of the systems that had overwhelmed Hitler's regime. German citizens rebuilding under U.S. occupation saw their cities revive. American aid outstripped our wartime production. This reality erased lingering Nazi myths of superiority. The U.S. zone, managed by General Lucius D. Clay until 1949, transitioned from military governance to economic revival, with 2 million tons of monthly supplies supporting both occupation forces and civilian needs. The wartime logistics pipeline, established by the War Production Board, now delivered food, coal, and machinery, proving that American leadership could sustain peace as effectively as it waged war. The formation of NATO in April 1949, driven by Truman and Marshall, cemented the wartime coalition into a permanent alliance. The United States, leveraging lessons from the European theatre, committed troops and resources to defend Western Europe, a direct legacy of the Germany First strategy of 1941. 2 million tons of supplies monthly had enabled the Rhine crossings. Now similar logistical networks underpinned NATO's readiness. The Cold War, emerging from the war's ashes, tested this framework, but the principles remained align: political will, coordinate allies, and prioritize resources. The defeat of Germany had proven these could dismantle a dictatorship. Now they shaped a bipolar world. The legacy of American leadership, born in the crucible of 1941 to 1945, was a system of power projection unmatched in history. Franklin D. Roosevelt's vision executed by Marshall and Dwight D. Eisenhower had not only defeated Nazi Germany, but also established the United States as a global engineer. The war's end, marked by Germany's surrender in Reims, was the beginning of a new order, with West Germany's democratic rebirth by 1949 as its first success. 2 million tons of supplies monthly had been the backbone of victory. Now they symbolized America's capacity to rebuild what war destroyed. This enduring framework, tested against the Reich, defined the 20th century, proving that disciplined leadership could reshape nations and secure peace.